Hello there, my friend. You are listening to episode 283 of Stand Up. Joining me today, former FBI Special Agent Ali Soufan and mental health professional, author, teacher, and cult expert, Dr. Stephen Hassan. I am Pete Dominic, not a doctor of anything or expert at anything other than shoveling a ton of snow like a snow removal expert. Stand up with me right now. Yeah, everybody. Hi, how are you? How's it going? How are you feeling today? I hope that all is well in your universe. I hope you are finding balance. That is my thing. That is what I think life is about, or at least what happiness is about. It's trying to find some kind of balance in your life, or aware that you are not just focused on one person or one thing, being a career or even a hobby or a passion, and that you have several different things and people in your life that bring you balance. Balance. The idea of losing one of those things and having nothing else that brings you any kind of happiness, contentment, joy, or purpose is bad. That's why I think balance is good. And that's what I'm, again, searching for. I had it, I think, for a while in my life. But that was when I was working in corporate media, and now I'm working for myself in independent media here in the shed, and I'm trying to recapture that sense of balance in my life, and I'm figuring it out. It's different to work for yourself versus working for someone else, to work from home versus working in a big city at the top of a skyscraper. There's a lot of differences and changes, and I'm very excited about almost all of them. The transition has been challenging, but absolutely fascinating, and I highly recommend making a major change in your life if you have the opportunity to do it. I was really pushed into this situation, but I am finding so much good in this new situation and loving making new discoveries and trying to figure out how to live the most balanced life I can. It's going pretty well. It really is. I'm enjoying the pursuit, but I just wanted to put it out there and hope that you are finding that balance in your life. Oh, and get a dog. Yeah. Oh my gosh, dogs. I just can't believe how much of life I missed out and not having a dog. I love my dog so much, and I'm so much more interested now in your dog. It's just great. Indy and I having a great time playing in the snow, which we got almost 2 feet here in Rockland County, and hoping to maybe go skiing at the end of the week. Might take a day off. Can you believe it? All right, I just wanted to check in with you and thank you, because I cannot do it without you. For over 800 of you now subscribing to the podcast, and thank you very much. By the way, if you subscribe to the podcast, sometimes your credit card at the first of the month, there's always a few subscriptions that just disappear, and it's because the credit card expired or there's some issue there. So always check to make sure that if you're a subscriber, you're signed up, and your credit card is still being charged so that you're still getting the emails, and so you're still a member in good standing. But I just realized that here on the 2nd of February, there was like 20 subscriptions that were just gone, and people hadn't canceled them. So what does that mean? So check the credit card if you're a subscriber, and that's it. All right, there's a lot that I wanted to discuss here at the top. I've got 2 great guests that I'm very excited to have joining me here, Dr. Stephen Hassan and Ali Soufan. Hassan and Soufan. Just figure that out. Day 14 of the Biden administration, and House impeachment managers have accused Trump of whipping the crowd in Washington, D.C. on January 6th, quote, into a frenzy and then aiming them, quote, like a loaded cannon at the Capitol. That's the language that really got locked in the echo chamber yesterday. Also, Trump's lawyers denied that he sought to subvert the election results and incite the deadly assault on the Capitol. I mean, really? Good luck with that. I can't wait to see the case. The Biden administration announced it'll distribute COVID-19 vaccine doses to retail pharmacies across the nation. When are you getting yours if you're a normal person? I don't leave the shed that much, so I feel like I shouldn't really be at the head of the line. I'm 45. I'm in good health. I'm ripped. All right, not quite, but I'm getting back to it. Biden is also forming a task force to reunite families separated at the southern border under the Trump zero-tolerance immigration policies. And got a lot of headlines paid to Donald Trump's former chief pollster, showing that, you know why he lost the 2020 election? Because of how horribly he handled the coronavirus pandemic. And also because voter perception was that he wasn't honest or trustworthy. So that's Trump's own chief pollster as to the outcome of the election and why he lost. And he did lose, even though most Republicans still don't believe it. And a lot of Republicans in Congress are the reason why, including the former president, still saying, always will, that he won the election. So let's get back to, though, the Biden administration, also the Senate confirmed Alejandro Mayorkas as the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. He's the first Latino immigrant to lead this major bureaucracy, Department of Homeland Security, which was created after 9/11. And even though Senate Republicans voted against him, he was able to secure enough votes for confirmation, 56-43. And also, Pete Buttigieg became the Secretary of Transportation, the first openly gay cabinet secretary. 86-13 was the vote there. And for that reason alone, those two reasons, I think that's progress. I think that makes yesterday a good day. That stupid groundhog came out of his hole, and I don't even know he didn't come out of his hole. There's a bunch of jackasses that wear Abe Lincoln stovepipe hats and beards and no masks, and they sat around that stupid giant rat and decided that it did or didn't see his shadow, and it will or it won't be more winter. It's just so stupid. And watching them, I watched a video of them with that dumb thing, groundhog. And I don't like groundhogs. Clearly, you can tell because I'm a gardener, and they are my main enemy. My main terrorist threat is a groundhog and its family in my house. But these guys, they weren't wearing their masks, and they were all leaning in, looking at the groundhog and talking to him. And I don't know. I got to get one of them on the show and interview them. Like, who are these people in Puxatan, whatever it is? Anyway, so that happened. Mitch McConnell likened Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene's loony lies and conspiracy theories to a cancer on the Republican Party. Here is fake Mitch McConnell, comedian J.L. Covan.
So as I've said, Marjorie Taylor Greene is a cancer on the Republican Party. When you have a cancer, you have to remove. Unlike Donald Trump, who was more like HIV for the Republican Party. Sure, it's not great, but you can still do something when you have HIV. Look at Magic Johnson, very prominent African-American with HIV, who has many successful businesses. That's what Donald Trump was. He was our HIV. But we were able to still get tax cuts from judges. So what I want to do is remove the cancer that is Marjorie Taylor Greene. And doesn't that make me a very responsible, upright Republican? Even though by basically allowing Trump's political HIV to run rampant through the party, I'm sort of like the stepfather to Marjorie Taylor Greene's political career, but I don't apologize. I just want credit now for condemning her. And by the way, when we do remove her from committees, I want to be there because I anticipate she'll be very sad, very upset. And I want to see it, because as you know, I get very excited when I see pain.
I get very excited when I see pain. J.L. Covan as Mitch McConnell speaking forcefully on why Marjorie Taylor Greene is like cancer and why Trump is more like HIV. Follow him on Twitter at JL Covan and listen to his podcast, subscribe on YouTube. He'll be joining me again very soon. By the way, Dr. Aaron Carroll set to join me for tomorrow's show. And Thursday night, also, we meet 8 o'clock, the stand-up hangout. So subscribe now. And I got to give a shout out to new subscribers. I got to remember to do that tomorrow. Let me write a note down. All right, let me move on and play for you Jonathan Swan of Axios sitting down with Ted Cruz on HBO, Axios on HBO, pointing out to Ted Cruz why Republicans are such hypocrites when it comes to debt and deficit. I thought this is great. Take a listen.
One issue I haven't heard discussed at all this election, let alone this debate, is the debt and deficit.
Yeah.
Mick Mulvaney had a great quote, and he said, you know, when there's a Democrat in the White House, my party, boy, do we care about the deficit's the worst thing in the world when Barack Obama's president. But Donald Trump came in and, you know, we're not so worried about that anymore. He's right, isn't he?
So, look, I'm very worried about the debt. And I'm worried about it under Trump. Now, to be fair, Trump didn't campaign on cutting the debt.
He did. He said he was going to eliminate the national debt in 8 years.
He also said something, what is it, I'm the king of debt in 2016.
Right.
Trump has said from day one, look, he gets to decide his priorities, and they're not necessarily all my priorities.
But here's the thing.
The fact that
I don't doubt your sincerity on this. You have been consistent. This is not directed at you, but stepping back, you belong to a party that has greenlit a historic expansion of deficits and debt. And it's just a plain fact.
Do I wish that it was a higher priority for the president to rein in spending and the debt? Yes. He didn't run principally on reining in spending and deficit and debt. That's not what he promised to do. We had real differences between it. And you know what? The voters made a decision.
I will remind you, he did promise to eliminate the national debt.
But let me give another element of it. Yeah. And this is where, in terms of how you eliminate the deficit and move towards reducing the debt,
you're going to say growth.
The most important factor. Trump's policies have been profoundly pro-growth.
Yeah.
No.
The tax cut. Also profoundly pro-deficit. Do you think your colleagues, the Republican Party, will rediscover its concern about debt and deficit?
Sure.
I mean, isn't that the most cynical, phony thing?
There's an element of it.
Doesn't that make you want to puke?
You're touching into something that, as you know, I have raged against. And I have raged against my own party not genuinely fighting to rein in spending and deficits and debt.
All right, that's just part of the interview. I'm sure, and I didn't see the rest of it. That's just one I found to share with you. I'm sure Jonathan Swan asked him about his sedition, right? I'm sure we'll see that. And now, speaking of senators, let's play Democratic Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia, who was on Fox News yesterday in the last 24, talking about the filibuster, saying that he couldn't see any way around getting rid of it or keeping it, I should say, that he would get rid of it. And then he paid tribute to his former mentor, Senator Byrd of West Virginia. Here it is.
Minority Leader Mitch McConnell said the reason he was going forward with the power sharing deal is because you and Arizona Senator Kyrsten Sinema essentially pledged publicly that you would not break up the filibuster, the 60-vote threshold for legislation.
True.
Two questions here. One, under what conditions would you vote to end the filibuster?
I don't think there is any. You understand, I come from the state that had a senator who served this country unbelievable, but the bottom line was he was a defender of the Senate. He used to tell me, Brett, he said, hey, Joe, he says, when I was governor, he says, let me tell you about the Senate. It's a special place. There's nothing like it in the world. He says, why do you think Rhode Island has 2 senators in California? The smallest and the largest? Why do you think that? Don't you think our founding fathers were thinking of basically how the big person couldn't press to the smaller person? Why do you think we have the filibuster? So that the minority has input. This was ingrained into me. And he said, Joe, they even named a rule after me called the Byrd Rule. You know what that's there for? Why I put that in? He said, so they couldn't go around the back door and do away with it. So you're talking about a person that's going to defend the legacy of Robert C. Byrd.
All right. Well, the legacy of Robert C. Byrd is spotty, but nonetheless, that's your point. That's why you're going to stay against the filibuster, because of Robert Byrd's respect for the Senate. Senator Joe Manchin did say he's now yes for reconciliation for coronavirus relief. He said, I will vote to move forward with the budget process because we must address the urgency of COVID-19. So it looks like we will have a major stimulus bill coming out of the Senate with no Republican votes, but Joe Manchin is not going to vote on any big legislation, it would seem. And I'm not sure that anybody has the answer as to how they're going to convince him to. Although it was a pretty good maneuver to see from the left, Kamala Harris, the vice president, putting pressure on him by going and doing a local news, West Virginia news outlet interview. And then from the right, it was the governor of West Virginia, Jim Justice, saying, we need the money. Who cares? Played that for you yesterday. So that was interesting and forced Joe Manchin, I think, into supporting reconciliation to pass the COVID rescue relief money. So we'll look to see that passing within a couple of weeks, I think. And that is all for the best news segment, the best daily news segment in all of podcasts. Tell your friends, very robust news segment. And I'm not done. That was the last 24 in sound and headlines in the national political scene. But let's get to some non-political, non-COVID headlines that are still important in what I call the news dump. And our friend John Carroll made this new news dump intro. What do you think?
What's the score there at the door? Last 24 news dump.
All right, let's start with the news that the richest man in the world, is he the richest man in the world? He's one of the top three, I think. Jeff Bezos stepping down as the CEO of Amazon. Former Secretary of Treasury Robert Reich tweeted, Jeff Bezos did not quit. He is becoming the executive chair of the Amazon board, which means he'll be even more powerful while avoiding the media scrutiny. More power, less accountability. Robert Reich, who also tweeted, who else is sick of billionaires like Jeff Bezos thinking that a little philanthropy can make up for decades of exploitation? Support the unionization of Amazon, folks. It's the least that we can do for getting packages 7 minutes after we ordered them. All right, here's a good story. Eric Siegel and I have been talking about the old Confederacy, the Confederate flag, the symbolism of it all. And coming out of North Carolina, the Division of Motor Vehicles is announced it's no longer issuing specialty license plates featuring the Confederate battle flag, according to a statement. The agency said the removal of the license plate issued to members of the Sons of the Confederate Veterans Organizations has taken effect January 1st. That's according to Star News of Wilmington. That's great. Great news. And that's progress as well. Now on to Stone Mountain, Georgia. Get that flag. And now let's head to Florida for a crazy story where 2 FBI agents were shot to death and 3 agents were wounded while serving a search warrant in a child pornography case in Florida on Tuesday, according to the Associated Press. Police described an incident in Fort Lauderdale suburb of Sunrise that began shortly after 6 a.m., noting a suspect was barricaded inside the home, according to NBC News. They described the scene as safe just after 9 a.m. Then the gunman is also dead and believed to have shot himself, according to the Miami Herald. Police said the agents were planning to seize the computer of a man suspected of possessing child pornography. Now let's head to Russia, where thousands of people are in the streets protesting that country's leader, Vladimir Putin. A Russian court ordered opposition leader Alexei Navalny to be sent to a prison camp for 2 years and 8 months. He's one of President Vladimir Putin's fiercest critics. And at a hearing in Moscow's city court Tuesday, a judge ruled Navalny should be imprisoned for breaking the parole terms of a suspended sentence for fraud from a 2014 trial that had been previously widely criticized as politically motivated. Of course, last year he was poisoned, almost killed by a fatal nerve agent. And the decision to imprison him is widely being seen as an attempt by the Kremlin to neutralize him as a political threat following his return to Russia from the Kremlin. He's a former lawyer. He's 44 years old. Jesus, he's my age. He's become one of Putin's most significant opponents, built a grassroots following through investigations posted online exposing alleged corruption among powerful Russians close to the Kremlin. And as he was waiting for the verdict, he drew a heart sign for his wife, Yulia, who was watching in the courtroom on a glass cage in which he was held. I watched that video. Heartbreaking, but what a hero this guy is. I'm closely following this story. I hope that you will be too. And, of course, the biggest storm in years, nor'easter slamming the East Coast, bringing more than 2.5 feet of snow, winds over 70 miles an hour, and coastal flooding. Highest snowfalls were in Montague, New Jersey, where 33.2 inches fell, and Nazareth, Pennsylvania, where the accumulation was 33 inches. Washington only had 2.5 inches. Philly had 7 inches. New York City got 17 inches. And Boston only ended up with 1.5 inches, really? Oh, Boston, you guys suck, man. New York had like 17 inches. All right, that is your news dump. Now it is time to get to my first guest joining me today, an old friend of mine, friend of the show. He is a former FBI special agent who investigated the USS Cole. He also is an expert on interrogation techniques, traditional ones, and has been outspoken against torture, probably one of the leading voices against torture in America. He is the chairman and chief executive officer now of the Soufan Group, which is a leading national security counterterrorism expert. He is the author of 2 excellent books, Black Banners and Anatomy of Terror. You've seen him on every single news network. I helped him get on the Colbert Report back in the day. How about that? Ooh, that just made me think of a good idea for today's show ender. And now, my conversation with, on Twitter, by the way, at Ali_H_Soufan. And I'll be making this video available on youtube.com/standupwithpete as well.
You know, we usually focus on the threat itself, right? So when I was, in the FBI and even years after I left the FBI, the main threat has been what, we call the jihadi terrorism, the Islamic type of violence, extremism. And so my focus was on it from the very beginning, even before bin Laden and al-Qaeda became household names. So after al-Qaeda, we also continued to focus on ISIS. It's not like al-Qaeda went away, but there's a new threat that evolved out of this, the jihadi terrorism, which is ISIS. So we focused on that. We were, I think, our center, where I work now, was the first entity to raise the flag on the foreign fighters phenomena. A lot of times, even governments in the West, to include the United States, didn't want to focus on or didn't even want to acknowledge that there's a problem with foreign fighters going from around the world to join ISIS in Iraq and Syria.
Right. Foreign fighters, meaning just people from other countries, Western Europe even, and countries that weren't as typical to recruit, were joining ISIS in Syria and other places.
Right. At the time when we started realizing that there is a dangerous trend with the phenomena of foreign fighters from around the world, governments in the West wanted to focus on getting rid of Assad, not necessarily on what's happening with ISIS or al-Qaeda or al-Nusra or all these extremist groups. And getting rid of Assad is very good, but also at the same time, it is equally important to focus on the terrorism threat that is emerging in that area and how, extremism is getting, more emboldened because of the events of Syria and Iraq. So at the very beginning, I think we counted about 12,000 foreign fighters. Nobody wanted to pay attention to this phenomena until ISIS took over Mosul, and then everybody was using our numbers for a long period of time. And we continue to focus on this. But then by every metric, we start seeing that white supremacy extremism is becoming a bigger terrorism threat, not only in the U.S., but also in many Western countries. I think the rise in terrorist attacks by groups or individuals affiliated with this movement and its ideology raised more than 320% over, the last 5 years. And this is according to the UN. And when we start looking into this phenomena and we looked into the United States, we found out at least between 2001 and 2016, after 9/11, more than 70% of all the lethal terrorism incidents or
we cannot call it legally terrorism, lethal violent extremist incidents that took place in the United States. The people who carried out these attacks, belong to some form or another of the far-right violent extremist ideology. So that's why we started to focus on this threat and raise awareness of this threat, especially that we notice many groups and organizations who are usually on the fringe, have been in the fringe for a long period of time, because let's be honest, white supremacy always exists in the U.S. They have been on the fringe, have becoming more and more mainstream because they were emboldened by the narrative of the former president. And that's when we started to raise awareness, like we did with al-Qaeda, like we did with ISIS, like we did with foreign fighters, raise awareness on the threat of white supremacy and neo-Nazi radicalism. And I went about 2 years ago and I testified in Congress after writing an op-ed in the New York Times about this. And unfortunately, not a lot of people paid attention.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about why that is, but getting back to your expertise in terms of how it begins, white supremacy has been in this country since its origin, since its beginning, and it's taken different forms. But I think we start with an ideology, and then we talk about a movement, and then we talk about how sophisticated this movement might get, how it may weaponize. How do you look at and compare the ideology with the al-Qaeda and the jihadist terrorists to the ideology of white supremacists terrorists? Because it seems like, if I were to shorthand it, it's this hijacked form of interpretation of their religion. But it certainly does seem that even though it's not a traditional religion, and most of them are Christian, if they are religious, it sounds religious, the ideology, the white supremacist ideology. It seems religious, even if it's not based in that. Is there a comparison to be made in terms of the way the people are recruited and think of the movement in a religious way, however they define it?
Well, they definitely think of it in an ideological way. You're right. And some of them use the Bible, as the Bible has been used throughout history, to promote sometimes the separation of races, for example, in the U.S. And, people can find verses from the Bible very similar to how people can find verses from the Quran. But overall, I think the white supremacist movement that we see today and the neo-Nazi movement that we see today learned from the war on terror, learned from the experiences of the jihadis. And we see a lot of parallels between both of them. For example, white supremacists make propaganda warning of an alleged great replacement of whites. In the same way, jihadis talk about supposed war against Islam. Jihadis make martyrdom videos. White supremacists publish manifestos. Jihadis, employ violence to create a religiously pure society. The white supremacists also likewise employ violence to create a racially pure society. The comparison even extends to the naming of groups within the movement. For example, when you look into the neo-Nazi organizations here in the United States, there's a group, they call themselves the Base, which is a translation from the Arabic al-Qaeda. They use al-Qaeda manuals. They use articles from Inspire magazine from al-Qaeda in Yemen on how to build bombs in your mother's kitchen, for example. They have black flags as their flags. They call their war a white jihad. And we've seen that term being used not only in the United States, but also in Europe. But more crucially, what we started to see that the jihadis, for example, in the 80s, and I testified about this more than 2 years ago in Congress, that the jihadis, used to find conflict zones to go there, to train, to build networks. Afghanistan, for example, Chechnya, the Balkans, Iraq, Syria, and so forth. So they always went there. They get together. They swap tactics.
They get on the monkey bars, apparently, according to that video.
They do a lot of different things. And white supremacists now they have this in eastern Ukraine. So there is a transnational nature of the movement, and many of the groups that we see here in the United States are connected to groups in other countries, and that's why we need to start looking at the threat not only as a domestic terrorism threat, but also as an international terrorism threat.
Yeah, really good point about, you keep bringing it back to it being an international threat in Western Europe and Ukraine. And
sure,
but I mean, it's what's gone on in this country for I don't know what time frame we want to use, but when you think about these militia groups in Michigan and Montana and Idaho, and you think about Ruby Ridge and what happened there, you think about other cults like, the Branch Davidians. I mean, we have seen, well, that's not probably a great example because it's not really what we're talking about today, the Branch Davidians, but the militia groups, the Oath Keepers and so on, the Klan, they've always been around. They've always organized. They've always even met at a lodge. I mean, during Obama administration, remember when those Bundy assholes took over that national refuge? So these guys have always been around. They've always organized. They've always been able to train, whether on the weekends or even living on a compound. How do you surveil that? How do you conduct counterterrorism against Americans who have been here their whole lives, who have huge networks, who can come and go as they please, who understand our laws and how to use them? And I think probably you've got to talk about our gun laws specifically, and in terms of how they're able to manipulate. I mean, you can bring your gun to the state capitol. How do you launch any kind of counterterrorism techniques in your own country? Law enforcement, surveillance, all of it, and obviously fighting against the ideology itself.
Well, it all has to do with accountability, right? Like, for example, you mentioned those folks, the Bundy who took over the refuge, the federal park in Washington State. What happened to them? I mean, the guy went to jail and Trump pardoned him, right? Give him a pardon. So more and more, these folks believe, they feel emboldened. They feel that they have the support of a big portion of the Republican Party, unfortunately. And as long as there is no accountability, as long as they can get away with things, we're going to see more and more of these things. Because as I mentioned, in the immediate aftermath of the insurrection on January 6th, I said the insurrection was a total success. It wasn't a failure for these guys. And it's going to be emboldening them more and more down the road. And that's exactly what's happening. Last week, DHS basically put a statement out that they are being emboldened by the events that took place in the insurrection, because there is no real accountability, right? When you treat them exactly, if you're treating somebody from Black Lives Matter or somebody who's a Muslim who did this in the Capitol, or whatever crime they did. When you treat them the same way, then they will think twice about doing the crime, because they know they're going to do the time. But if they are doing the crime and they know they're not going to be doing the time, they're going to be more and more emboldened. And unfortunately, we're going to find ourselves going down the path of, extreme violence because they can get away with it. And they will continue to get away with it. And there is a significant portion of our members of Congress who are giving them the political covers to do exactly what's going on.
I think the issue that really does concern me the most is that even if we knew what to do and we had the resources to do it, I worry about how influenced members of law enforcement at every level, from local, state, and federal level, are to this ideology, vulnerable to the ideology being espoused by domestic terrorists, white nationalists, anti-government extremists. How concerned are you about folks that are currently working in law enforcement that either share the ideology or at best or worst look the other way when, members of law enforcement they know espouse these beliefs themselves?
Look, it's very dangerous phenomenon. We have been in the center, in our center, we've been warning about this for a while. White supremacy in law enforcement and white supremacy in the military. And unfortunately, it took an insurrection for people to wake up, for the Pentagon to wake up and start to look into, the white supremacy and neo-Nazi elements in the ranks. And we have the same thing with law enforcement. The FBI put a warning, I think, a year ago about these radical, violent extremists in the ranks of law enforcement. So this has been known, but unfortunately, again, no actions have been taken. No actions has been taken because, again, there is no political support. There is no political will. There is no bipartisan acknowledgement of this big threat that we're having. And frankly, that is very, similar, if you want to call it culture, to the Trump culture. Right, the president has been really a big advocate for these groups. He has, a lot of people said using the dog whistle with this portion of his base. I think it was a bullhorn more than a dog whistle.
Yeah.
We've seen that again and again and again, and he get away with it. And frankly, he get away with it because, even during when he was running for campaign, remember when he said, I don't know who David Duke is, or all these kind of things about, all Mexicans are rapists and stuff like that. The media coverage of him was superficial. I mean, we claim, we put a lot of focus on social media and all these things, but also on the real media. I think he got away with a lot of things. He was allowed, when he was running for office and for the 4 years he was a president, he was allowed to set the agenda of newsrooms across the U.S. And he handedly, most of the time, determined the 24-hour news cycle through his tweets, through his statements. And many of the red flags were only superficially covered, if they were covered, but definitely none of them were truly investigated. So they failed. The media failed to expose Trump to the American people, and they always fell to his smoke screens, in a sense. I think in the last 4 years, the media in the United States, all the media, frankly, suffered from a journalistic version of an ADD, attention deficit disorder.
Yeah.
And we've seen that, how they, allowed him to get away with so many different things. And when they woke up to the fact that this is now melting the foundation of our republic, I think it was too late. And they have no credibility among a base that he nurtured for the last 5 years or so.
So given all of that, what are your main concerns? What are your worst fears? I know people don't like to hear them, but I like to get realistic because we stay with these kind of general terms about civil war and domestic terror. But when we think about the past, the kind of things that have happened, you think, obviously, I think you go to Timothy McVeigh right away, but you also think of people like the Charleston church shooter. I don't like to say their names. But who wanted to start a race war and killed all those people in a black church, and those types of more lone wolf acts. Sometimes they're more organized than others, but what do you see outside? I mean, do you see those kind of traditional terrorist acts occurring? Do you see it more organized? Do you see lines being drawn? If so, where? How do you see the future domestic terror threat and actually how it plays out if it were to be operational?
I think we are in a very critical time in America. And I think we have a threat, and we need to acknowledge the existence of this threat. We need to acknowledge it in a bipartisan way, and we need to target it as a unified country. Because if we did not target it as a unified country, and we don't have a bipartisan support to go after these kind of groups, unfortunately, the hyper-partisan nature of our divide today will feed into these organizations and these groups and will make them more emboldened and bigger. So unity is extremely important on this. I'm trying to be as optimistic as I can be, but I really don't see people in Congress understanding how dangerous the situation is and how horrific it might be down the road if we don't stand up against these kinds of groups and against these kinds of narratives that they promote, if we don't call a lie a lie. I mean, you have a member of Congress, I don't even like to say her name, she has been saying horrific things, all lies, all conspiracies, and so far, not one single Republican in Congress,
right,
at least in the House, have been vocal against removing her from her committees. I mean, this is dangerous because if these individuals who are training in different camps probably around the U.S. or plotting to do violent activities down the road, if they see their ideology and their narrative being promoted by members of Congress, it's going to further embolden them.
Right.
So we need to go after these individuals. Now, we dealt with this threat before. You know, after the Civil War and in the early 1900s, the KKK was probably one of the most powerful political parties in America at one point. Then we had, the problems in the 30s, the biggest event, Nazi event outside of Nazi Germany was in Madison Square Garden.
The Garden.
In the Garden. You can Google it and you can see the photos of it. In the 60s, we had the civil rights movement and all the reactionary forces who did not wanted to, give equal rights for our African Americans, brothers and sisters. So the same thing happened. In the 90s, we had these groups who were trying to, come back from their, from the fringe. And, you mentioned a couple of the events in Ruby Ridge and others with the attack in Oklahoma City. But again, we fought them in a unified manner. I remember, the NRA called the FBI and the ATF booted thugs. And George Bush, President Bush at the time, Sr., immediately returned his lifelong membership of the IRA and said this narrative is not acceptable. That set the tone to his party, even in Congress. So that helped in creating a unified response to the threat that was going on. But unfortunately today, we don't have that political courage. We have people with no spines who are still kissing the former president's ass. And the former president is basically looking at these groups as we've seen him, groups that he can use, like he used in the insurrection in 2000 in January 6th. Look, if an insurrection is not enough for these people to wake up, I have no idea what's going to wake them up.
That was actually, I was going to go back to that, and that's exactly what you said. It's like, my question to you was, if they're operational, what do their operations look like? And I guess the answer is January 6th. Led by Alex Jones, Steve Bannon, Donald Trump, all the people who spoke. Those are the leaders of it. But regardless, the fact that all of those people showed up on that day and did what they did, they broke into the Capitol, which was shut down to the public because of COVID already. I mean, it wasn't open to anybody to go in there, and did what they did. What's to say they're not going to promote another date like it's a concert, but choose the state capitol in Michigan where you're allowed to bring guns? What's to say that they're not going to be doing those kinds of things? But the bottom line is, when they happen, when January 6th happens, it would be like looking at Oklahoma City and saying, listen, it's understandable. It wasn't that big of a deal. Granted, it wasn't as, explosive, literally, the Capitol, but I think there's an absolutely fair comparison to be made to Oklahoma City or anywhere else on what happened January 6th. Just because there wasn't as much bloodshed doesn't mean that people in your line of work don't look at it as what the worst case scenario could be and what the future holds, right? Isn't that how you look at it? Isn't it very comparable to other terrorist attacks?
Yeah, I mean, look, you're spot on. And when you have DHS saying white supremacy is the number one threat for this nation, when you have the director of the FBI saying white supremacy is the number one threat to this nation, when you have a report coming from DHS, the first time a report like this came since 9/11, talking about the neo-Nazi and white supremacy threat, Where is all the law and order people? Where is all the people who always support the FBI and we cannot say anything about anything on the war on terrorism because it doesn't support the people in the field who are trying to keep America safe? Where are they? Not a word. Nothing. They are not giving the FBI the support that they need. They are not giving DHS the support that they need. And they want everybody to look the other way and turn the page for the sake of unity. Imagine if Osama bin Laden after 9/11 said, "Hey, come on, guys, don't retaliate against me. Let's have unity now, right? So let's not fight, Or the Japanese, like, hey, you know what? Forget about Pearl Harbor. Let's try to have peace now after we bombed you and killed thousands of people, right? This is pathetic. This is what's happening. And if we don't have accountability, but this is a Trump culture again. Trump, every time he crosses a red line, and then it becomes normal when he crosses it.
Yep.
So he crosses a bigger red line. And it's like the boiling frog theory, right? By the time the frog realizes it's being boiled, it's too late. And that's what's happening. Every time they cross a line, they cross a bigger line and a brighter line and a bigger line until we had the insurrection of January 6th. And if this insurrection is not, a bright enough line for people to wake up, I have no idea what it is. And this is a culture that has been going on, did not start with Trump. Trump took advantage of it. This has been going on. And you and I had this conversation in so many different, occasions about the culture of the lack of accountability in America. How many people were held accountable for allowing 9/11 to happen? Everybody who was involved in not sharing information with the FBI, for example, and State Department and other law enforcement and intelligence agencies about these guys being here in the United States. They were not fired. They were not put on leave. They were not demoted. They were promoted under two administrations, the Bush administration and the Obama administration. How many people who were involved in torture get accountable? How many people who sold the lie of the Iraq war, where 75% of the American public believed on the eve of the war in Iraq that Saddam was behind 9/11? How many people were held accountable? I know some of them get medals. None of them were held accountable. How many people were held accountable for the economic collapse in 2008? Too big to fail. Let's not hold them. Everybody is too big to fail. And now they want us to say, Trump and the conspiracists and the white supremacists and the neo-Nazis and the crazies who follow him, they are too big to touch. So let's look the other way. This lack of accountability, this culture of impunity is what led us here in the first place. And if we don't put our foot down, if we don't start holding people accountable for the crimes that they do, guess what? It's going to get worse.
Right. Yeah, that's a great set of points about accountability. And not only were they not held accountable, in many cases, the people who committed those crimes, and many of you know them, some of them personally, especially when it comes to torture, were promoted. They were promoted either within the government or they were given book deals or, commentator deals, hosting their own shows and so on. The actual architects of torture have not been held accountable. But, before last question and a big question.
And not only that, and our government, administrations in our own government, they masterminded the disinformation campaign to promote their own false narrative about torture, about the Iraq war. You go down the road with all these kind of things. So that's why, I'm not, the Russians are not geniuses to figure out, disinformation can work with Americans. Yeah, because they saw our own government doing it. Disinformation have been always a partisan issue in America.
Right.
And unfortunately, in the last few decades, it's becoming worse and worse. And people were held accountable. And there is a reason. Many Americans don't trust the government, don't trust the institutions, don't trust the media, because the media was always a tool for these folks. You know what? George Bush and Dick Cheney and the Bush administration could not sell the Iraq war without the New York Times and without the media.
Yep. No,
right?
I think what you're saying is
let's
a lot of these institutions aren't trusted not because they're not good at what they do necessarily, but they're not good at one of the most important parts, which is accountability. And so when they blow up the economy, when they blow up actual people, when they invade other countries, when they torture and they're not held accountable, that creates a distrust for the government. When, the CDC gets something wrong, when it becomes political, that creates distrust for the CDC. But
one of the things, look, there are amazing people in the media. We have amazing journalists. And thanks to these journalists, we were able to know a lot of the bad things that was happening during this administration. But how much of these stories were really covered outside just the story written by a journalist? How much airtime did these stories got? You know what I mean? So the problem with journalism in America, I think it's access to journalism.
Yeah.
That's what we have. It's access to journalism. So there is two sides for every story. Oh, torture worked. Torture did not work. They say they didn't work. They say they worked. Let's have a fight about it and let's create ratings. Truth did not matter. So I don't blame Trump and his cronies when they said, hey, it's alternative facts.
Yeah.
Because you know what? This alternative facts existed during the coverage of the Iraq war. This alternative fact existed during torture. This alternative fact existed during the war on terror. This alternative facts existed with the economic collapse of 2008. We always have alternative facts. We always have, it depends, what do you feel? Do you feel that torture worked? Okay, then. Great, it worked. Do you feel this strategy is good in the war on terror? Great, then it is good. It is good. If you don't feel it, okay. There's also stories in the media that tells you it's not good and it did not work, and we shouldn't be doing something like this. There is, sometimes there is a truth and there is a lie.
Yeah, no, there's
the media's job
one
is to
side.
tell you what is a lie and what's the truth.
Right, and to ask the people who know it, and on torture, you're the guy who knows it didn't work, and you said it.
Well, I'm just giving it as an example.
No,
it's
been
involved in, but it's basically the reality. And then we say, oh, why people don't trust the media, or why people don't trust the government, or why people don't trust the institution, because a culture of impunity where people did not know the truth anymore, so they fell victim to conspiracy theories. Yeah. They fell victims to lie, to disinformation campaign, and welcome to America 2021.
Well, my last big question to you, though, is when it comes to accountability, there has to be an investigation. And when you think about 9/11 and the investigation that went into that and the commission report that came out of it and how many different investigations there were of that, I feel like then you can fast forward to Benghazi because it's the one that people know the most about, where three, I think, contractors and the ambassador were killed in that attack on the American consulate, was it, in Libya? And there were, I think, 9 investigations. It was huge news. The name of that town in Libya now is, people in bumfuck Idaho know the name Benghazi because it got so much attention, so many investigations, congressional committees that looked into it. So my question is, considering past investigations by the government into anything from Oklahoma City to what happened in Waco to 9/11 to Benghazi, how does the investigation into January 6th supposed to look? What questions need to be asked? How should we be looking at the investigation into that to prevent it from happening elsewhere, and then to get to that accountability that you keep talking about? Should this investigation be giant?
Absolutely, it should be giant. I mean, 5 people were killed in that. It was the biggest threat, against our republic since the Civil War. This is huge. During the entire Arab Spring, we didn't see a parliament being resacked the way we saw the U.S. Congress. You're talking about the U.S. Congress here. You're talking about the temple of American democracy. So this is probably one of the worst, darkest moments we had since the Civil War. And we can't just look the other way. And we cannot approach it in a partisan manner. It has to be a bipartisan investigation, look into all the things. Unfortunately, I don't see political will to do something like this, not as long you have the like of McCarthy being the leader of the House.
I appreciate your time today. I love talking to you. I can't thank you enough for joining me. I'm going to let you go. You and I both are going to go out now and shovel over a foot of snow. You and I both have back issues. I think yours is far worse. How come you don't send your assistant out there to do it for you, Ali? What happened to that young boy?
Because my assistant is doing his own radio show.
You want me to come over?
When you finish, come over.
How far will you get, honestly? How long do you plan to be out there? You really going to go out there and shovel with your back and all that?
Dude, I think I will shovel probably next to the door. I have...
You're the president
I have a lot.
of a major company. You've done well for yourself. I feel like somebody else is going to be out there shoveling. Thank you very much.
If I find someone to help me, I will.
I appreciate it, buddy. Good luck. I thank you very much for your time, as always, and talk to you soon.
Bye.
All right, there he goes. Ali Soufan, really good buddy of mine. Love when I get the opportunity to talk anything with him. Family, work, life, shop, security, al-Qaeda, working in the FBI. So good. Get his books and tell him that you heard him on the show. He is on Twitter. He'll see your tweets at Ali_H_Soufan. And I think I never previewed the show ender, but I'll play a little of his appearance at the very end after the music. Stay for it. And a little bit of his appearance in the Colbert Report. Okay, joining me now, my next and second guest for today's show. I think this is his maybe his fourth appearance on the podcast. He is a renowned expert on cults and undue influence, mental health professional, author, and teacher, specializes in recovery and strategic interventions. Go to freedomofmind.com and get his books as well. A really interesting work from Dr. Stephen Hassan, especially his most recent book, Cult of Trump, but also Combating Cult Mind Control, Freedom of Mind as well, books that he authored. And definitely check out his hit YouTube page as well. He's got like 8,000 subscribers there and a great YouTube page. Here's my conversation with Dr. Stephen Hassan on Twitter at Cult Expert. All right, there he is. Now, Dr. Stephen Hassan, congratulations, sir. It's great to have you back on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, it's been a journey, right? Lots of things going on.
Yeah, it's been a while since we last spoke, certainly since before the election. And I just wanted to start with a broad general question in terms of what, if anything, you think has changed amongst the mass of people who voted for, supported Donald Trump, who obviously many of which there's overlap, support a lot of the conspiracy theories, the big lie, the insurrection. What has changed in terms of people's beliefs? Have they gotten stronger? Have they started to deteriorate? What have you seen? What can you say broadly?
Well, broadly, I was worried about violence if Trump didn't win the election. I actually wrote about it in The Cult of Trump and made connections to Jim Jones and that his followers would do whatever he told them to do. So I was very much surprised that there was so much infiltration into the police and law enforcement, so much involvement with other leaders in the Republican Party to make this happen. We were lucky. We dodged a very violent moment in our nation's history. And then, of course, the worry was, would something happen after the certification, which was great that it happened. But then, of course, Josh Hawley, etc., were trying to still reinforce the lie about the election fraud. And I cried when Biden was sworn in. I was so relieved. It was like a nightmare, like 1,000 pounds coming off of my shoulders, because now we've gotten a chance to rebuild our democracy and deal with some very deep structural problems that have existed over decades, as I outlined in The Cult of Trump. And I just am so glad grown-ups are now in charge in Washington with the pandemic. I've signed up as a licensed mental health counselor to get my my COVID vaccination, and I will take a picture of it when I take it and proudly talk about it. And I even did a scientific presentation to in coronavirus.org conference talking about cults that are promulgating a distrust in medicine and science and then the vaccination effort and etc. And I think that we're dealing in psyops, psychological operations, psychological warfare. And I really feel like I'm uniquely positioned to share my, journey of almost 50 years, having been in a right-wing cult that wanted to take over the government. And by the way, I don't think I said this the last time we were together, but literally in 1974, Pete, as a Moonie, Moon said to us, God wants Nixon to be president. We're all going to Washington. We're going to fast on the Capitol stairs for 3 days.
Oh, wow.
And the story goes, my father had voted for Nixon. I thought he was a crook. I got in the Moonies. I'm in D.C. I call him up, telling him, Dad, we're fasting for Nixon because we want him to be president. And he said, Steve, you were right. He's a crook. And I said, Dad, you don't understand. God wants him to be president. And he said, Steve, now I know you're brainwashed. The guy's a crook.
Wow.
So, and then on January 6th, it came to my attention that the son of Sun Myung Moon, who claims to be king and has a crown of bullets and a sanctuary church called Rod of Iron Ministry, brought a busload of people to the insurrection and was tweeting out how Antifa was doing all of the and Washington Times, the Moonies newspaper, was, promulgating the big lie that the violence was the left wing instead of the Trump supporters.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there, and
I figured you'd think that, but it really was just a historical moment, and I thought to myself, if my family didn't deprogram me, and if I was still in, I could have been there doing that.
Yeah.
Yes.
You've got these two big lies. You've got the big lie about the election, and then a lot of the concerns over the vaccine, the creation, the origins even now of the virus. There's a lot of theories about that. And I wonder how you think we need to handle these people, how we need to talk to them, what, if any, policies, programs that we can set up to try to help them change, see the truth, rewire them, because your practices work on a one-to-one basis and you see patients, but there's millions and millions of Americans and folks in other countries as well that believe in things that didn't happen and don't believe in things that are happening right before our eyes. Is there any kind of broad general idea, policy, programs that could be initiated by government or by nonprofits that you know about, that you think work?
Nothing that I'm aware of now. I, of course, have lots of ideas, but it's going to take a task force and a really big effort, a coordinated effort with experts. But it needs to be done. I mean, this is not a quick fix, but we can do, we have to think about the next 3 months, next 6 months, 1 year, 2 year, 4 year, 10 year, because, and it needs to be global, because essentially mind control is in the 21st century, and it's coming through our platforms. It's coming through our smartphones 24/7. And we have to start educating the young people as soon as possible. We need to find volunteers who are activists who want to help their family members and friends. We need to train mental health professionals for how to help this population, because they're not trained as a universal. We need to educate the media about how communication works, and we don't want to mistakenly amplify the wrong messages that are going to amplify polarization instead of building bridges and explaining things in ways that are not going to be incendiary. I'm very excited to be on your show and to be finally asked to be interviewed for the cult of Trump, because it was pretty much a hot potato while Trump was in office. But now that this has happened, people are all of a sudden realizing, yeah, he really said it. Everything he said is actually true. And there are structural problems like extremists who are in our police and in our military and in our government that swear for the Constitution, but they really don't honor that code.
That would seem. How did you see January 6th and all of the stories that have come out about the people that were there? Again, you can't generalize. There's so many different types of people and so many paths, seemingly infinite paths that brought them there. And we can look at where the funding for the event came from and the types of rhetoric and who is using it. But nonetheless, this was not something that happened overnight. These people found this movement. They found this cult. They found their way in through Facebook, through friends, whatever it is. And what was your reaction, or what has been your reaction in reading the stories about some of these people, Stephen? Maybe pick one or two, or any of the type of people that you saw show up there, the types of things they did, they said, that to a lot of us, it's easy to dismiss and say, wow, this person is a complete idiot. They went in with their face uncovered. They said, hi, my name is, some of them had the names of their companies on their jackets and so on. They really thought that what they were doing was not against the law. But I think you see it differently in terms of they're not idiots. That's too easy to dismiss them. What did you see when these, as you hear about who these people are and what brought them there?
So I would say, as a generalization, most people verbalize things like you just did, that people found QAnon or found Trump. But I look at it the other way, that Trump had a pyramid structured media empire, social media network with Putin's agents and agents of the Christian right and the neo-Nazis and the gun lobby and the pro-life movement, etc., that were using gathered data scraped from Cambridge Analytica and from other ways to micro-target and micro-manipulate people into incremental indoctrination. Not everybody who believes that Biden isn't the duly elected president thinks that QAnon is okay. Most don't. I did predict, I think it was in October, that if Biden won by a landslide, that QAnon would go down. A lot of people would exit. And what happened when Biden was sworn in is a lot of people realized, because that was the line in the sand.
Yeah.
Martial law wasn't going to be declared 5 minutes before with the cell phone emergency alert system.
Right.
And so a lot of people are very confused, disoriented, ashamed. And that's why I was really calling out, reach out to your family member or friend. Don't say, I told you so. Just say, I miss you. How are you? I care about you. Let's hang out when all this is over. Reconnect emotionally, play old music that you know the person liked before the cult involvement, etc. But unfortunately, people are vulnerable now because of the pandemic, the economy, and these cults are just scooping up as many people as they can who were disillusioned a few weeks ago with the election. And so it really is a battle for the minds, if you will. And of course, folks like me who was there, I have a big heart for people who were indoctrinated into these right-wing fascist ideas. And I think the fact that so many of them thought that the president was behind this insurrection and coup and saw the police saying, come on in, come on in. Of course, they weren't going to mask themselves and such because they thought they were, that they were patriots, right? But I can just say that if something is legitimate, it will stand up to scrutiny. I think the media has been doing a disservice by calling it a kooky conspiracy theory instead of more correctly, in my opinion, calling it an authoritarian cult that has many different tentacles and many different front organizations. But I'd say the world is facing a crisis of authoritarians versus people who are democratic leaning and human rights oriented. It's not right and left. It's really authoritarianism versus human rights. And I would argue that there are many cults that are being described as Christian evangelicals in Trump's space, but they're actually, in my opinion, authoritarian cults where the leader is claiming to get revelations from God and can cast out demons and everything. And Orthodox Christians don't believe these things. They don't believe that Christians should take over governments. And, they believe Jesus's words about feeding the poor and visiting the sick and taking care of the widow. So we really need to amplify the voices, I think, of different constituencies like religious leaders to say that's not Christianity.
Right.
That's not Judaism. That's, Judaism loves life, or that Christianity wants life and is not anti-science.
Yeah, we can have these different interpretations of religion. It's hard to convince anybody whose is necessarily the true form of it, and so it's always a continuing struggle. But I would think, that you had said, and you said it again there, that maybe sometimes when it doesn't work out, when the predictions don't come true, people start to fall away. What have you seen so far?
Oh, I think a lot of people are disillusioned. And, I think a large amount of what's happening is the information bubble. If people are not willing to listen to other facts and presentations, if they accept the indoctrination of fake news, anything that's negative against us is fake. And the media is the enemy of the people. If you have that mindset, instead of saying, look, let me read it for myself, let me fact check it myself, let me listen to both sides and come up with my own opinion, because that's really thinking and using your own brain. I think that there's reason for a lot of hope. I do believe that it's necessary to hold people accountable. I do think that it was very important to deplatform Trump and QAnon and other extremists. And people say, but free speech, free speech. And I'm like, the law is very clear. You're not free to call fire in a crowded theater if there's no fire. If there is a fire, you have a duty to warn to help preserve life. But doing things to cause violence is not what a society can say is, oh yeah, do as much as you want.
I agree with you that it's a good thing, but are you concerned that it somehow creates a larger, more intense cult, and that Twitter has silenced Trump and others, that it makes them a martyr? I mean, how much of a concern do you have about that possible effect?
I have a lot of concern, and I want to just talk about a concept called complex systems theory. It's been around since the 80s. It's something I've learned, but it instead of thinking cause effect in a linear way, it's like move, counter move, and it was naturally predicted that people would go to other platforms. But the question is, would they continue to influence vast numbers of Americans who were following the office of the president and feeling like it was their duty to follow the president? So I think that my last information was that Parler was kicked off of Amazon and is on a server in Russia right now, along with some, other extremist groups. So for people who are true patriots, they will want to understand the deep connection with Putin and the intelligence services and the Trump attempted takeover.
What do you think, if anything, the media gets wrong? You mentioned one thing earlier about not calling it a kooky conspiracy theory, but calling it a authoritarian cult, which I like. But, for example, everybody's now being introduced to the great work, the great mind of Marjorie Taylor Thomas, is that her name? Green, whatever her name is. I get that name confused with the actor from Home Improvement. My bad. Sorry to him. But what...
Really?
I mean, what, if anything, do you think is wrong with the coverage of her current beliefs, her past beliefs, her behavior? Is that an example of, some people are saying the media is paying too much attention to her, but I really don't know. And I wonder what you think the media is doing wrong.
So I think that people are so numb and overwhelmed by the disinformation that's been coming at us, especially for the last 4 years. And the distrust is so high in what do I believe, etc.
Yeah.
And I think that instead of preaching to the people who already think that she's not a good person and shouldn't be in our Congress, we should be messaging broader. And that doesn't mean giving equal time to someone who's spewing lies. Like, I thought from the beginning that was a terrible idea to do equivalences, to say, well, 97% of global climate scientists say there is man-made climate crisis, and there are a few experts, the same ones that were paid by the tobacco industry, saying that tobacco didn't cause cancer, saying there's no such thing as climate change because they have fossil fuels. Whether it's their country, like Russia, like Texas and other things. And 97% in the scientific community is pretty certain. Right. Gives a little wiggle. But you don't give equal time to someone who's giving propaganda and disinformation. That's a big mistake.
Right. Well, I agree. I think that his, the deplatforming, I think what you said is that it's just the signal doesn't get out to as many people. It just can't. And that's important. It's interesting, though, to see that Alex Jones was a huge part of the Stop the Steal rally. He funded it. He helped bring in one of the biggest funders, and he got a position to speak there. And you would think that a guy like that would somehow fade away, go away. He's got no platforms, but he seems to be doing okay. And so sadly are many of his ideas.
Yeah. So I wrote about him in The Cult of Trump. And at the time that I wrote it, it was documented he had taken 1,000 disinformation stories from Russia, spun it out, Breitbart picked it up, Fox picked it up, and then the major outlets picked it up. So it kept amplifying. Big mistake. I've been listening to Alex Jones talk about civil war and telling people to buy their assault rifles and buy their supplements for when the civil war is coming. When he talked about eating his neighbor if he was hungry to feed his family, right? This is the guy who brainwashed his kids to hate their mother, in a custody dispute, right? So we need to, what was great was when the victims of Sandy Hook sued him for the lies. Yep. And he said on deposition, I must have been I have a psychosis when I was saying that. I mean, we need to do more lawsuits where we hold people accountable for these horrendous lies so that people can know that they are dangerous people.
I would imagine, and you're probably pretty busy these days, but if people know someone that want to get them help, and go to freedomofmind.com and follow Stephen on Twitter, buy all of his books. They're so informative and help you understand what you or your friends, loved ones are dealing with, and with a lot of compassion because of his own experience and his own life being a member of a cult. Very few people have your kind of credibility and your education and the passion with which to apply it. So happy to have you doing this work, and just sad that it's so important. It's just so important.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And really, we need to scale how to help people, empower people. And
well, I think you should just get can't you just get someone like you get a grant to see people as well as train other therapists to understand?
I don't know how to write a grant, but I bet someone may be listening to this who knows how to do that.
Well, someone wants to help.
I do want to say that while I would love to help the administration, I think I would probably be more effective not as a government, connected spokesperson. But I'm not shutting any doors, because the goal is to help as many people as possible, as much as possible.
Thank you very much, sir. So appreciate your time, as always.
Thank you for your good work, and be well.
All right, there goes Stephen Hassan. Definitely follow him on Twitter at cultexpert, freedomofmind.com. Get his books, watch and subscribe to his YouTube page. And all of that is linked in the show notes, as is everything every day. I hope that you will consider a subscription to this podcast. I know there are many, but I put this out every single day during the week with at least almost always two experts. Sometimes we only have one guest, but usually two guests, and a great news segment. So please tell your friends if they're looking for a podcast that they can learn and grow from and stay up to date with everything that's happening in the world and get a good understanding as to how to think about it. Maybe a few chuckles here and there as well. Check out Stand Up with Pete Dominick. Give us 5 stars on Apple, wherever you listen to it. Write a review. That would be huge. And subscribe at patreon.com/Pete Dominick. Go to the paid subscription link in the show notes. And tomorrow night, Thursday, and every Thursday night at 8 Eastern, I'll be meeting up with usually between 50 and 80 subscribers. Usually bring a special guest to join us. Always a good time, and you can hang out anytime on the Discord platform. If you have any trouble getting to any of that, just email me, standupwithpete@gmail.com. Gotta go. Love you. You're not alone. Goodbye. Take it away, John Carroll.
Stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We got to let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well, and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up, got to stand up. Ooh, come on, just stand up. Everybody got to stand up in the darkest hour. Stand up, people got the power. Stand up. Come on, 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 stand up.
My guest tonight is an expert on getting information from terrorists. I'm going to have him call Time Warner customer service for me. Please welcome Ali Soufan. Hey, Mr. Soufan, thank you so much for coming on. Now, many of the people here may not know who you are, but they really should, because you've got quite the impressive CV. You're a former special agent for the FBI. You served on the front lines against al-Qaeda as an interrogator and a counterterrorism operator. And you have a new book called The Black Banners, the inside story of 9/11 and the war against al-Qaeda. What's a black banner?
This is actually what al-Qaeda believe they are. The black banner is a saying from the Prophet of Islam, Prophet Muhammad.
I know who that is. Yeah.
That said that the black banners...
Sounds like a good guy, yeah.
The black banners will come from Khorasan at the end of times for the final battle of Armageddon. And bin Laden made a lot of these people who joined him in al-Qaeda believe that they are part of this black banner myth that's going to come towards the end of time. It
So it's an apocalyptic vision.
Well, it just gives us how little we know about al-Qaeda as an organization after all these years fighting it. So.
No, you actually found out a fair amount of al-Qaeda, and you did that for the greater good of the United States. Let's tell the people some of the stuff you did here. You got bin Laden's bodyguard to identify the September 11th hijackers. You got Abu Zubaydah to finger Khalid Sheikh Mohammed as the 9/11 mastermind. And you unearthed Jose Padilla's plan to use a dirty bomb. And I assume all of that was waterboarding. Because that enhanced interrogation is what got us the tips we needed to fight al-Qaeda.
Actually, none of this that you mentioned is because of enhanced interrogation techniques or waterboarding. For example, Abu Zubaydah. The first question I asked Abu Zubaydah his name, he gave me an alias, a wrong alias. So I looked at him in the face and I said, what if I call you Honey? Honey was the name his mother nicknamed him as a child. And he had that, oh my God, on his face. He got me, you know. And then we start talking, and he gave actionable intelligence in the first hour of our interrogation with him.
Yeah, but it wasn't enough, because they eventually brought in an outside contractor who waterboarded him 83 times.
Exactly.
So if you were getting good information, they wouldn't have given him the, you know, the free swimming lessons.
Right, right. The 83 waterboarding session is just a perfect example how these techniques don't work, because if it works,
what do you mean?
You're not going to do it 183 with Abu Zubaydah, 183 with Abu Zubaydah, with Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. I'll give you an example. These enhanced interrogation techniques that concludes with waterboarding, as appalling as they are to people in the West, it is nothing compared to what Abu Zubaydah of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed are expecting to receive if they are caught in some Middle Eastern jails, for example.
Right, so we're still the good guys for doing it. So just to be clear, you don't have a problem with waterboarding.
I do have a problem with waterboarding because I don't believe it's effective. Let me tell you how interrogations work, for example.
I know how that works. Good cop, bad cop. Right?
No,
bad cop
really.
waterboards, good cop carries the towel.
No. Where were you when I was on the front line?
I was on the front line here, my friend, every night. So how do they work? How do you believe that they work? You
outsmart the individual. You have a lot of information already in your under your fingertips on that person, on the organization. You try to outwit them into knowing that you have a lot of things about them. Like, for example, bin Laden's personal bodyguard had no idea who were the hijackers. We only knew that he knew one of the hijackers. After we made him believe that that hijacker may be a source to us, and he knows a lot about him, he started identifying everyone else. And this is how we knew that 7 out of the hijackers were al-Qaeda operatives, and we had all the information that we needed at the time that al-Qaeda was behind 9/11.
Okay, now, so you say you don't need to use waterboarding for any of that.
Right.
But Vice President Cheney said that enhanced interrogation, like waterboarding, is how we got this information. Are you saying he is not telling the truth?
Well, I am saying that I was there and he wasn't. And I'm saying...
Are you... If you are saying, go ahead, no, go ahead.
And I am saying I'm the only one so far in the U.S. government who gave a statement under oath about the alleged efficacy of enhanced interrogation techniques. So when other people want to raise their right hand and take that oath and answer the questions, then we can talk.
So if you're saying that these other people won't take an oath, you're saying that these people are not telling the truth. You're saying that Dick Cheney is not telling the truth. And I know the only way to get the truth out of him. To waterboard the guy.
I believe there's many other ways.
No.
Ali Soufan on Comedy Central's The Colbert Report. How did he get booked on that show? Bye-bye.